Welcome back to Beyond the Helmet. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Steve McGrath, and today I'm very pleased to be joined by former Oklahoma Sooner, former first-round pick. It is Andre Woolfolk. Andre, how are you doing today, man?
Doing great, Steve. Glad to be on, finally connecting with you.
I know this has been a little bit in the making. I certainly appreciate you taking the time, fitting me in between the hectic schedule that you have going on. Man, so I'm sure, that being said, that likely something's going to pop up. So I'm going to try to get quick to the point because our time might be limited here. I had told you before we started, I knew that you were part of the Oklahoma team back in 2000 that won the national championship, that really helped Bob Stoops plant his flag as being the preeminent coach in the country, or at least one of them anyway. So can you, from the jump, man, can you take us back to like 1997 when you're in high school? What position were you playing? What were you thinking about your future? And how do you ultimately end up in Oklahoma?
It was extremely strange, to be honest with you. I didn't pick up football till my freshman year in high school. That's the first time I played organized sports, period, with a team. So I didn't even get to start on my varsity team until my senior year in high school. So obviously, all the fanfare is, oh, where's this guy going to go to college and stuff? That wasn't around for me, just because I had to make a name for myself quick and actually get into a program. So my senior year, I ended up with 10 interceptions, which led to state, which was great. And but at the same time, I'm not doing schoolwork that's necessary for it. So it came down to only a few teams that were actually looking at me. And at that time, John Blake was the head coach of Oklahoma, and he had just came off his rings from Dallas and all that other stuff like that. So he sat in my living room and really talked a great game for everything that was going on. Little did I know that there was turmoil in Oklahoma at that time. So when I first got there, me being 6'2", about 150 pounds, I already knew I wasn't going to be playing or anything like that. So it was more of that whole 97 to 99 phase, or 98. It was kind of a gray area of growth, but at the same time, confusion, just because there was a coach transitioning out, and me trying to actually learn the sport on the fly, and now being introduced to big time players. I think before we came onto recording, you mentioned Rex Ryan and and their whole 46 defense and all that. And coming from high school, you really don't know all the details that go into that. So it's like getting slapped in the face quite hard when you first got into the game.
So, you see Rex Ryan before he becomes a household name. And the guy that takes over as Coach Blake leaves is not yet a household name at the time. But in 1999, can you just talk through what it was like for you to see a new coach come in? Obviously, this is not the guy that recruited you. I don't know how drastically it felt as a player at that time to see all the changes he was making with the new coaches that he brings in, the culture he's trying to instill. But can you talk about just what that was like? But on the other end of it, at what point do whispers come around that maybe you're playing on the other side of the ball?
You know what? There was great fear when our coach got fired, because you're thinking this new coach is going to bring in guys that he wants and all this other stuff. But all the fear that was surrounded, or with everyone else, it was different for me, because it just looked like new life and new opportunity. My entire freshman year, I spent on the offensive side of the ball playing scout team wide receiver. So when Coach Stoops came in, he asked me what position I played. And I start looking at our offense with, at the time we were running wishbone, which means we had no receivers. So I said, I play wide receiver. I mean, that's the only tape that I have. And he's like, oh, okay, that's cool. So right off the bat, never once did I take one snap at defensive back the first year when I was with Bob Stoops. And to be honest with you, it's the best thing that ever happened to me with the transition with him coming in there, just because the belief system that he brought in there. Of course, he had the swagger coming from Florida. He had the credibility and all that, but he brought a core group of coaches that actually all went off to other colleges to be head coaches and stuff. and they all believed and made sure that it was pretty a tight knit group.
It's funny, right? Because not only play for Bob Stoops, who goes on to cement his legacy, but like OC, well, you play for Mike Leach, who, oh, by the way, basically sets up the modern day, air raid offense. And if you play in defense, it's only Brent Venables and Mike Stoops. Mm-hmm. Brent, obviously, incredible career still at Clemson. Mike, incredible career in his own right. No matter where you were playing, you were having tutelage by some of the best.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. You interviewed Jonathan Hayes, who was our tight ends coach,
yes,
and special teams coordinator. Like, I think if you looked at it, there was probably 6 to 8 guys that have really cemented their feet in college football.
Definitely. Now, one of them would cement their legacy a little later on, because a backup running back with the name of Seth Luttrell is now the North Texas head coach, but he was your teammate at the time. I mean, it's hard to play for a coach and say, hey, where will this guy be in 20 years? But I'd imagine it's even harder to look at the guy next to you and be like, hey, this is going to be a future college coach at a big time program. Did you ever get any feeling that, Seth would be that kind of guy?
He's pretty militant. I mean, some people come across as they're just going to be always rooted in the sport. He came across that the same way. And then, of course, Josh Heupel, he came across like that too. He just always had that work ethic, but also just the studying habits, and everything was just football. It's almost as if nothing else mattered or existed. It was just football.
Got it. So I have to ask them, because 2000 rolls around, the second full year there. Of course, that's the undefeated season, national championship. But you pop off for over 40 catches, over 600 yards, 5 touchdowns. It's safe to say the whole wide receiver thing started to go pretty well. So, at what point does now getting back over to the other side of the ball start to enter the equation?
All right. So it was a little bit of misfortune for one person. Our starting corner, Michael Thompson, his truck veered off a road and hit a tree. And so, of course, our starting corner's down. And at that time, I don't know if they weren't all that interested in other people that were playing corner, or they just started digging into the files a little bit more. And they asked, is this something I'll be interested in? I'm like, okay, I don't want to give up receiver, because, of course, I'm becoming a little diva, of course, because you get to see the ball a little bit more and all that. And it is a different position, a different beast. Mike Stoops was extremely intense at that time as well, too. At the receiver coach, there was Steve Spurrier Jr., who was the most relaxing, cool coach that you could ever have. I think he was 29 at the time or something like that. So it was perfect. All of us guys loved us and all that stuff. But Coach Stoops just sat me down and was like, well, how about we just let you play both ways? And I said, well, if you do that, then I'll play anywhere you want me to. Like that. I mean, I'm always going to be there for the team, and especially coming off of a championship, you're like, man, this is going to be even more awesome. Who gets the chance to play on one side, let alone gets to play on both sides? So I was like, let's just do it. But I will say it was strange doing it, because I never knew what side of the ball I would be practicing on. And I only found out the day of the practice with the colored jersey that they put in your locker.
So, I mean, it seems like you were pretty easygoing. The way that you're describing this, it doesn't seem like you were too nervous about anything. Is that a fair assessment of how you sort of perceived how you were going to go about playing whichever position, whichever day?
Yeah, as long as the receiver part was still going to be there, I think I was fine. It was when they posed for it to be only defensive back. That's the only time that I had a giant question of what next. But before then, I was just happy that somebody thought that highly of me to actually play both sides. I was like, why not? I mean, who's not going to try to do this?
For a good team, it's not like you're some poor team that has no talent and you really need to do it. It's like you're on a team that just went undefeated and
Absolutely
basically is only going to lose 2 games, worst case scenario. So, I mean, that's a testament to how talented you were. So
Yeah, I never thought about it like that in the moment. It was really easy to not be like that. But yeah, it sounds better when you say it, I guess.
So, being a young kid, and you don't have the privilege of hindsight that we have now. I mean, are you thinking, by the time it's 2002, are you thinking about, man, what are my NFL prospects like if now I might play defensive back full time and I might not do as well? What happens if it does go well and now there's a question mark of where do I play? Do you start thinking big picture yet, or are you just so focused on being along for the ride that that's not part of the equation?
Let's see. So my junior year, which would have been mid 2001 or something like that, we had just got done playing Texas or going into the Texas game, and that's the first game that they told me I was going to play defense only. And Bob Stoops said he sits me down in his office, which you typically don't get sent up to his office. Usually he comes down and gets you. But I got sent up there, and he sits me down and he says, "At your height, your size, your speed, and your ability, you have a greater chance of going to the NFL and making an impact if you actually play corner." And don't get me wrong, at that time, I didn't completely believe everything because the first thing I thought of was they're trying to make sure the receiver we had, Mark Clayton at the time, who was behind me, they're just trying to make sure that he got some more time. And of course, we saw what Mark Clayton did once he got on the field and got to breaking all our records and went to Baltimore and had him a nice career as well too. So it was a little bit of guarding myself at first, but then I took it as some more of, I don't know, some verbal guidance from our own coach who I already trusted anyway. For him to be able to sit down and tell me, "Hey, this is where we need you most, but this is where you actually had the best chance." So then he started giving me examples of receivers that were like me in the NFL who were just guys and kind of basically barely made it there. And then he started showing me defensive backs that were my height, my speed, and all that stuff like that. And he just says, "You just have way more potential in this area." So I stuck with it, and it wasn't exactly the easiest thing to do, but it paid off. It was good.
I mean, you work your way into being a first round pick. So, 2003 rolls around and the Tennessee Titans lock you in first round. I mean, what were your expectations going into that draft, considering that the amount of tape of you as a defensive back was fairly limited when you consider the amount of wide receiver tape? Um, I mean, what was your whole thought process throughout that entire transition to the NFL?
I didn't know what to think, to be honest with you. I never watched press clippings. I never knew anything. I know at one point, the agent that I ended up signing with, he had Mel Kiper on the phone with me and all this stuff like that. And he's talking about this big board. And I didn't even really know what the big board was. I just played the sport. My whole life has always been like this. I saw a guy in front of me. I try to be better than him. And that was the goal every single time. It wasn't like I need to be the greatest something. I'm like, I need to get on the field so I can do something great. And that's always been my approach. And the only way I can do that is knocking off the guy that's in front of me, no matter what position it was, no matter what team it was on or what level it was on. That was always the goal there. So thinking about draft and all the other stuff like that, I'm like, oh my God, I didn't want to even watch the draft. So I didn't watch 1 minute of the first round. I was actually golfing. It was the worst round of golf I ever played. But I had no expectations until I got to the back nine and I realized they were like on pick, golly, 20 or something like that. And I started getting a little bit worried because I'm trying to figure out what happened in the draft and why is it going so slow. And that year had a bunch of funky things that happened on with a few guys that I was cool with at the time. I think Kevin Williams and Minnesota missed their pick and some other stuff.
That's
So
right.
it just felt like that day took forever.
That's right. I remember that. Um, so when you get the call that you're going to the Titans, I'm sure they're telling you that it's as a defensive back. By the time, like all the way through, your first mini camp and that off season, is there ever any question about playing offense, or is it strictly defensive back?
No, it was strictly defensive back. The guy that the defensive coach at that time, Everett Withers, he actually recruited me out of high school as well too, and to go to Texas. So he always saw me as a defensive back, and I thought that was great and all that stuff. I needed something to be more concrete anyway, and I had more years under my belt as a corner than I did as a receiver. As far as if you're looking at over the lifetime of my career and stuff, so offense was never there. I mean, they had enough good guys there with Drew Bennett and Derek Mason and all that. They had plenty of people to take care of that side.
So, I mean, you seem like you just sort of take everything in stride. So, did you ever have a moment that first, rookie mini camp off season where you see like, oh, that's Steve McNair, that's Eddie George, and I'm covering Derek Mason, and the guys next to you, whether it's Lance Schulters or Samari Roll giving you pointers. Did you ever feel like, oh wow, I'm in a little over my head, or was it still you just showed up, try to beat the guy in front of you, and it's all good?
Nah, it wasn't like that. Everything changed then. That's when you were next to grown men. And I remember going into the locker room and seeing Eddie George and thinking, if every running back is this big, this is going to be a tough camp.
It's going to be a short career.
He was way bigger than any running back that we played with. It was ridiculous. I mean, looking eye to eye at a running back that's 20, 25 pounds heavier than you, it was way different. So, I mean, it wasn't so much about starstruckness or anything like that, just because I always respect the people I'm around, but it's never about, I don't know, lamenting on the fact that they're stars and stuff like that. We're all playing the sport. At the end of the day, I'm trying to get good plays in just like they are. But yeah, some of the some of the sizes and then some of the actual schemes were just so foreign to everything that was going on that's where the whole process changed for me. Tennessee was completely different than anything I had been accustomed to.
So that was the toughest part then, the mental aspect of getting the new scheme and maybe whatever verbiage might have been associated with how they run said scheme.
Sure, because then I also had to play nickel and dime, which was kind of like a baby linebacker position, basically. So that was completely different. So my studying habits had to become even great learning corner, and trying to learn one of the hardest positions, which I call it the hardest position on the field. Trying to learn that on the fly, while you have other guys that have been kind of tooled forever in that position is extremely tough, especially when they're crafty and they're when the receivers are veterans and they're trying to beat other veteran corners with their moves. You can only imagine what happens when they do those same moves to somebody who's still trying to study what move that might be anyway.
Really sounds like an uphill battle.
It absolutely it is. And the toughest part of the whole thing was some of the attributes that I felt like that I had were used less there than in Oklahoma, just because being a bigger corner, I want to touch somebody, I want to jam, I want to play bump and run and all that stuff like that. Once you get somebody into off coverage, then the knowledge of the game takes over more than just sitting there in a one-on-one battle eye to eye. So it was definitely an uphill battle for the whole. I would say the first 2 years were really, really, really tough.
And it's funny you say that, because when I was just looking at your pure stats over year, it was that third year where you've played in the most games. It's your most game starts. So what was it exactly that clicked? Was it really just enough practice time to really move from learning on the fly to now actually feeling comfortable that you've just had enough reps that you have the confidence?
I think the reps really, you have to live inside of the actual game to be able to grow in it. So it was the live bullets of failing over and over again throughout practice, scrimmages, and in games. And then actually being able to translate all the stuff you have, instead of it being, okay, this day I'm working on one piece and the next day working on the next piece. Instead, it just became something that was already tooled together. So then if you failed, it was just, I failed. It wasn't, I lost this piece or that piece. It was more of a making sure that I can gather all the tools at the same time and be okay with it. Now, when you start talking about doing that and then being injured or being not well or something like that, now you're trying to use the tools that one might not be good. So you're trying to favor other stuff that might make you have a chance in winning and stuff like that. But that third year felt like it started off well. At least in my opinion, they started off well and then kind of fizzled.
So when you think about the fizzling, and yeah, I guess we can wrap this into the second part. You know, from there on, your career with the Titans. I mean, how do you characterize, you know, how that went? What are your general feelings about it?
And I think once you're in professional sports and all that, the pressure of not winning highlights and magnifies everything. At that time, we had just brought in Pac-Man Jones, who uh, who was a character, to say the least. And it almost becomes to the point where never like babysitting or anything like that, but you definitely are aware that there's a highlight on your group. So anytime something happens, it's more magnified, basically. And with him being a younger guy, the same transition that we were talking about with me had to happen with him too. So certain coverages that maybe that I was great at, he wasn't understanding that coverage, or vice versa. He was a tremendous man-to-man cover corner. I mean, I feel like he is underrated when it comes to that. But there's other things that rookies just don't know when they first come in. Now he went on to have a great career, and it looks like he knew absolutely everything. At that beginning part, there was a holdout, there was some other stuff, and then we're rolling into games that we only can play certain things, and it just felt like everything started to tether out of place. Coaches are getting close to getting fired and all that stuff like that. So they got to get players in there that can actually do something and make some impact plays. And the corner behind me actually ended up stepping up really well. And he played for quite a while. Cortland Finnegan was a really good corner, and played a good role on several teams.
Definitely. So, you know, when you take a step back, you saw Bob Stoops create really just a powerhouse of an organization that, you know, he successfully handed off to Lincoln Riley. Oklahoma has been for 20 years now, one of the top teams in the land. And now you go from that to 12 and 14, your rookie year, the Titans. It looks like Jeff Fisher has everything figured out, but you see how quickly, how fickle winning can be, because all it takes is a couple bad years. You know, everyone now is nervous about their job. You know, Vince Young comes in to replace the legend that's Steve McNair, and all of a sudden you saw a winning institution crumble into nothing and gets turned over. I mean, do you have any ideas of what winning organizations do and what losing organizations do that keep them from becoming winning?
Uh, I would say winning organizations, if you look at something that Bill Belichick does, is he recruits people that are going to be part of the system. And basically he's not building things around you. He's putting you in something that's built. And that makes a giant difference to trying to make it where if you have a quarterback whose attributes match the scheme that you run, then it's more of a flawless, even if he's not great at it, it's more of a flawless transition when he goes in there and does that. And the same goes across the board. When we played New England that year, actually, the year you're talking about for 12 and 4, they had Troy Brown playing nickel on the field. So he was playing both ways and all that. And I just thought I would mention that right quick. But what he actually saw was his starting wide receiver was still better, and he was the third best corner on the team because that's how he viewed it, and he felt like his talents would be more suited to play there instead of the third corner, and those type of things. And uh, I don't want to say moxie or swag or anything like that, but just being able to tap into the moment of knowing your players, knowing your staff, knowing the direction. I think that's the greatest reason why teams stay good. And also making sure that there's an environment of growth, and knowing that it's not politicking who's a first round or second round. Like that doesn't matter. It's all about who can play and who can do what when they play. Put them in those positions to do it. And if you can't do it, get better at it, work at it, and then you can get out there on the field. Otherwise, they got to play the best.
Absolutely. So, I have to ask. I saw that your NFL career ended with a stop in New York. So, do you mind just speaking a little bit about the end? I saw that there might have been a hamstring injury too. How did you decide that it was time to hang it up?
Uh, anytime you go into practice and you are loading up on trying to make sure that you have some anti-inflammatories in you and that you're like overstretched and all that stuff like that, and just to even have a feasible chance in not only guarding somebody but actually making it back off the field without another pull or a tweak or something like that, that's when you feel like, okay, this just isn't working for me right now. It just isn't. And it wasn't so much of it's not working for me. It was also not working for them. Trying to guard against somebody that, because I just came off a hamstring injury before then, and then I went there and had an hamstring injury, and I'm already losing my speed, leaving my 20s, and next year, I'm trying to guard people that are coming in with fresh speed. is This is a horrible combination.
Diminishing returns. So, I
Yes.
mean, and this is a tough question, but I mean, considering when you just look at the body of your football work, I mean, do you feel any sort of way about like, man, I'm so happy for that ride, or do you have any sort of like, man, I wish that this had happened or that? Because you can play the what if game forever, and being content is like a solely a subjective thing that you can give two people the same exact set of circumstances and they can feel two different ways about it.
I used to say I was content. And then for a while, I was really mad at the whole game and trying to figure out how it all played out, what I could have done different, or what I like. Could I have trained different? Could I have approached something else different? Could I have maybe transitioned over to a safety or something like that? I mean, I had so many different scenarios go on, and really, it wasn't until as of recent that I actually felt like it was more of a badge of honor to be where I've been, just because when you think about climbing the ladder of success, nobody ever thinks about when they step off of it. And when I say that, that's the cliche stuff of, oh yeah, what are you going to do when you're no longer like that guy? And I never thought about it like that. I always said I had a plan. I really didn't have a plan. That's just, I said something. I said I had a plan, so nobody had to question if I had a plan or anything like that. So it wasn't until actually my son came around and my family were like, "Oh man, it's just crazy to think that you played in the NFL and all this." And I'm like, "Oh yeah." And then they talk about how the odds of something like that happening and the wealth of knowledge that you know about the sport and stuff. And that's when it started dawning on me that, you know what, I have to be more proud of it. I can't be ashamed of how it ended. I can only be proud of everything that happened, whether it was good or bad, because it was a learning experience through all of it. To be honest with you.
Oh man, I mean, the amount of NFL players that have ever existed is a small town. I mean, like to call it a badge. I mean, if you want to look to see all the guys that have ever been national champions or first round picks, I mean, it's such a small group that I would feel terrible for you if you felt any other way about it, because it is such a small percentage of athletes that ever get to check just any of the boxes that you've been able to check along the way playing for you, getting to see how multiple organizations work and playing for two great coaches in Fisher and Stoops. And that's nothing against any other coaches, because I know there's a lot of other good ones that were in the mix there too. But yeah,
No, you're good.
so you got through that process, you saw the scaffolding of like what it takes to get success, whether it's the work that you have to put in personally or what the team does or what a coach does, like a CEO. So when you did have to come up with that plan, you always said that you had, how long did it take for you to figure out what that avenue was going to be? And from everything I could see, I mean, you've been going hard in this direction for basically the entirety of your post NFL life.
I would say some of it was fluff. I ain't gonna lie to you. So we had a business right off the bat, so it kind of covered up some of that stuff. Because my last year we had my first child, which is a daughter, and we went and bought a business and moved here to Kansas, close to where my wife is from, and it would appear as if everything was fully functioning and we're just transitioning great and all that stuff like that. Really, I almost felt like a stay-at-home dad for about 8 years, and it got to the point where I read this interesting article called Six Harsh Truths That Makes You a Better Person. And I was like, okay. So I got sent to me by my brother-in-law, and I'm reading it. And one of the first things it talked about was describe yourself, but you can't describe yourself with like an emotion or a feeling saying I'm on time or I'm a nice guy and all that. He says, that's not a trait that people want. What do you have that's valuable to the world? I said, "Oh man, that sucks because I feel like I'm a nice guy, and I feel like I'm very dependable. That stinks that I can't use that. So I was like, what can I actually do? And during all this time as this was going on, I'd always been heavily in construction anyway. So I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go ahead and start making sure that everything I do is geared towards something that is tangibly evident that I can do that somebody else can't do. And it became woodworking, it became construction management, it became just knowing the whole process of it. And then I had to ask myself, if I laid down at night and wanted to wake up doing something the next day, what would it be? Like, what would I feel comfortable saying that I could do? And it was construction. And one of the main reasons is because it's so different from one day to the next that it's basically like a game. That's what it becomes. And I think there's a lot of players that actually get involved in it just because it is the nature of what the actual industry brings. Is it's just so ever changing, and you can be creative in it, but there are all certain principles that you have to do. So the formula wasn't there right away. I always thought I would be like cartooning and I don't know, doing some sports broadcasting or doing something, and end up swinging hammers basically.
And there's nothing wrong with swinging hammers, but oh, by the way, just like the NFL book was nothing but a chapter in your book. I mean, hey, there's always other chapters. Who says that you can't do sports broadcasting or anything else down the line, or even while you do this? So I rule nothing out. I see a guitar in the background. I don't know. Maybe there's a little music going.
I am I would say I have a Superman effect. I think that I can do everything. So if I hear somebody do something, then I look over there and then I'm like, oh, you know what? I think I could do the same thing. That's how I got into drawing. It's how I got into football. It was a bet by my brother that said you should play football instead of basketball, and I'm like, nah, I don't want to do that. But then I saw him play, and I'm like, you know what? I could do what he does. And it's just one of those ego things that I'm happy to admit that I do have an ego, but it just means that I'm trying to be better than the next guy, no matter what it is.
Little self-confidence doesn't hurt. I mean, I don't think you'd be here if you didn't have it, right? Maybe you should be a betting man. It's seeing how that last bet paid off.
Yeah, I'll stay away from the betting, but
Certain kinds
I
of
don't
bets,
know. Like I
small
said,
bets.
sure. I'll bet on myself. That's what I'll do. So
There you go. Well, Andre, thank you so much for taking the time to go through this. I want to end this conversation, though, on this little thing I call the gauntlet. I got a couple quick hitter questions for you where I need your knee-jerk reaction, starting with what is most important? Is it having the number one offense or the number one defense?
mm, number one defense.
All
Everybody can
right.
play offense.
Maybe not everyone. You could, but not everyone. Favorite?
Do you say having a number one offense or a number D? Go.
Yeah,
I
I
was
mean,
asking for clarification. Are you asking? Go ahead.
no, yeah. So, like, when it comes to winning, would you say the number one offense or the number one defense is most important in actually winning, having the best defense or the best offense?
Oh man, best defense. Best defense. That's why the Chiefs lost in the Super Bowl. Is because the better defense was out there, just hounding you.
I literally had to say that the last podcast I recorded when someone said the number one offense. I said, "Did you watch the Super Bowl?" Because Patrick Mahomes rolled in, and when the number one offense didn't show up, it did not work well. But I'm glad we're on the same page.
Yes,
So
absolutely. I've been a part of some number one offenses before, and when we got shut down, we lost the game. It just so happens that every time we sucked, the game was over.
so what is your favorite football memory then?
Mm, I would say I had an interception against Texas. A football memory for myself, that would be that. If you're talking about football memory in sports ever, mm, seeing John Elway get helicopter tackled on his way to winning the Super Bowl.
No,
Absolutely.
I
Being
was
a
going to say
Denver
you grew
boy,
up. Yeah.
yes, I grew up in. Luckily, Tom Brady came around to diffuse this conversation, but before then, I've always said that John Elway is the best quarterback that's ever played in the game, and that was over Joe Montana, that was over Brett Favre. If you can name me the receivers that he played with, other than like the Three Amigos, which was still not like something awesome. You're talking about Ricky Natil, Vance Johnson, and Steve Sewell. He did so much with so little that before Tom Brady was around, I always said John Elway was the best.
That's fair. That's fair. Um, by the way, I just thought of this. Your three interceptions in the NFL, they all came off of Derek Carr. I'm sorry, it's
David,
David.
yes, it all
Yeah,
came off
David. Yeah,
David Carr.
Derek's the younger.
Yes, got you.
What,
Other
what was he
brothers.
doing? What was his tell that was your guy?
He had a signal for slant routes and for out routes, and I don't know why. I feel like over the years it never changed, and I don't know if it was indicative of Texans or whatever. It was always the same. And if you can get a good jump on it, because yeah, he had a good arm, but if you got a good jump on it, you can actually jump the route.
Also, yeah, quarterbacks out there, you need an offensive line, or otherwise you end up like David Carr.
Oh
Um,
my God.
Poor guy. Now, pregame, did you have anything that you would listen to? Anything on the playlist that was a must?
Actually, I listened to nothing but gospel music. Part of that was fear of not being ready. So I just thought about what was going to make me be more like home because I grew up in a church. So my father was on the pulpit as a preacher. Mother was a teacher. I actually didn't like neither one of those places for a really long time. So I always listened to some gospel music. So if anybody listened to Fred Hammond before, that's what I listened to for the most part.
You are not the first person to say that gospel was your go-to. Um, so
It's Sunday.
what?
You gotta pay her some respect.
Amen. Now, what's most important? Is it the players or is it the scheme?
Ooh. That's tough. I would say that at the end of the day, it's going to be it's the players. It's the play. Just because you want to say the scheme has to match it well, but New England lost a couple of players, and their scheme still remained the same, and it was way different. it did not look. It did not look the same. So I would say it's the players, but hopefully the scheme can couple that together.
There has to be a marriage there, but I think players are just a little more important. But man,
Sure.
to end this on the most important question, given everything that you were able to accomplish, everything you did through college, to be a first round pick, to have that career, to earn that badge of honor, what's the best piece of advice that you'd give to a young student athlete that says, how do I get there?
Don't look at yourself as where you are. Think about where you want to be. Um, like I said, I didn't start to my senior year in high school. So if I thought of myself as a freshman, just as being what I was and nothing more, then I basically would have. I didn't need to play any more years because I was basically just settling myself short. So take your wildest dream and then go after it. Because if you get anywhere near it, you're going to be way better than what you would have ever been.
I love that. Perfect words to leave it on. Andre, thank you so much for taking the time, man. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you too, man.